There is no concept of monotheism anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and from Genesis all the way to 2 Chronicles, or if you're reading a Christian edition of the Old Testament, all the way to Malachi, the God of Israel was understood to occupy a heavens that was replete with other gods, even though they are represented and talked about and talked to in many different ways. We see it first in Genesis 1:26, where God says, "Let us make humanity in our image and in our likeness." And the scholarly consensus is that God is talking to the other members of the Divine Council, and the Divine Council was the deliberative body of the gods that controlled the functioning of the universe. And it was a reflection of assemblies and councils that existed on earth. And in the earliest periods of Israel's history, El, the patriarchal high deity, was the patron deity of the nation of Israel and sat over the Divine Council. Now, when Adonai was introduced to the pantheon, they seem initially to have come on board on the second tier of the pantheon as one of the Bnei Elohim, one of the children of God. And we see this reflected in Deuteronomy 32:8 and 9, which most scholars agree originally referred to Elyon, the Most High, dividing up the nations according to the number of the Bnei Elohim, the children of God. Now verse 9 says Adonai's portion was his people, Jacob, his share of the inheritance. Now this has been interpreted a couple of different ways, but this seems to distinguish Adonai from Elyon and identify Adonai with the Bnei Elohim, who are receiving as an inheritance a nation over which they function as patron deity. And so up until probably around the exile, Adonai was only sovereign on earth within Israel, and the other gods were sovereign within their own nations. So, for instance, Chemosh was the patron deity of Moab, Asherah was the patron deity of Sidon, Milcom was the patron deity of Ammon, Kos was the patron deity of Edom, and so on. Now, we see indications that Adonai's sovereignty on earth is limited to the nation of Israel in a number of places. Naaman, for instance, the Syrian general, when he goes back to Syria, wants to be able to worship Adonai in his temple, but Adonai can only be worshipped on Israelite soil. And so Naaman takes 2 cartloads of Israelite soil back to Syria with him. When David is being pursued by Saul and is about to be pushed out of the nation of Israel, he complains to Saul that your men are forcing me to worship other gods. Why? Because if he is outside the land of Israel, the inheritance of Adonai cannot be worshipped. And this is the complaint of the Judahite exiles in Babylon. They say, who can sing the song of Adonai in a foreign land? And so Adonai must be universalized. And I have argued in a Journal of Biblical Literature paper that was published in 2018 that Psalm 82 is one of the attempts to universalize Adonai, where those gods of the nations, the other members of the Divine Council, are condemned for their negligence in allowing the exile to happen in the first place. And so they are condemned to mortality. And then at the end of the psalm, the psalmist calls on Adonai to rise up and inherit all nations. So no longer is Adonai's inheritance limited to the land of Israel. Now Adonai has rule over all nations on earth. So while previously they ruled over the gods in the heavens, now their geopolitical sovereignty extends to the whole earth. And from this point on, we have Adonai discussed as God over all the earth. And the other gods of the pantheon don't just disappear. They're still a part of the scriptural heritage that is handed down from generation to generation. And so rather than just saying, oh, they're all dead now, they get squished down into angelic status and they become angels. And by Greco-Roman period Judaism, we have this tradition of a guardian angel over each nation of the earth, which is just a renegotiation of the earlier notion of patron deities over each nation of the earth. But now Adonai rules over the whole earth. And we see reflections of divine council imagery and motifs, even in places like Deutero-Isaiah, which is supposed to be monotheistic, but isn't, because God is calling on the gods in a number of different ways, treating them as astral bodies, treating them as God's host or army. So they're definitely there, even though the author doesn't want to acknowledge that they are gods. But That's precisely what they are considered from beginning to end, and that's why when we get to the Dead Sea Scrolls and even into the New Testament, there are still references to other gods. They have just been renegotiated to be lower-level divine beings instead of on the same level with Adonai. But to reiterate, from the beginning to the end of the Hebrew Bible, the heavens are replete with other gods. There is no monotheism anywhere in the Hebrew Bible, and the God of Israel not only recognizes and even engages with the other gods, but in some cases cooperates with them and relies on their help. And the fit for this video has been Bizarro.